Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman. Everyone out there, I hope you're having a great day because we have a great show lined up for you where in the second part of the show, time allowing, we will be doing computer and technology news. But the real gem is in the first part where we'll be talking to a guest all about something that, probably affects, and he would, I'm sure, have the numbers on how many this could possibly be affecting, but something that undoubtedly affects a number of our listeners, technology addiction. And I'm not talking about the cute kind of way. I'm talking about something that really has adverse effects on one's life. So this is, like I just said, not a topic that we have really explored here on the show, even though we've been on the air for, almost 29 years. It's a fairly, kind of unspoken kind of thing. So I'm happy to have him on, and we'll be talking to Mr. Kevin Sullivan here in just a moment. So everyone, before we get started, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including the show notes. It will have today's guests, any links, emails, things like that. Well, not emails. They'll have links, any articles that we talk about, any websites that we show, anything that we talk about during the news. Anything and everything can be found at Computer America, along with the video archive, the podcast, the live show, links, all that good stuff. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. So, as I said before, let's go ahead, get our guests in here with us, and just start talking about this in general, because, like I said, this is something that, I don't know, I'm sure needs to be talked about a lot more. I have seen really, really bad effects in my personal life, in my professional career. It's something, but I guess this idea that addiction can be anything more than drugs or alcohol is, in a lot of people's minds, just not really a thing. So to give us some perspective and talk about this in depth is none other than Mr. Kevin Sullivan. He is a sobriety coach and mentor, and I'm really happy to have him here on the show. So, Kevin, welcome on to Computer America. How you doing?
Ben, thanks for having me. And this topic is going to be wide and deep, so I'm looking forward to having this chat today. Thanks for having me.
Definitely happy to have you on, and like I said, this is something somewhat of unexplored territory for us, but we are more than happy to do that, to do something that we haven't really done on the show before. So before we get started, we always like a little bit of background on our guests. Why don't you go ahead and give us, kind of your professional history and how you decided that technology addiction was something to, really try to bring to people's attention.
Well, Ben, thanks. My history. I started out in business in my 20s and going up to New York City when I was about 3 years sober. My primary addiction was, kind of anything that would distract me from standing where I was. A lot of times when I was a kid, it was just the world would be bigger for me than my ability to stand in it. And so I started looking for things, whether it was, being a little kid and just coming home and needing to have the company of having the television on in the background, and later maybe things were getting uncomfortable and I just, started to drink, or, any one of a number of behaviors that would be considered obsessive or that sort of thing. Later on in business, I found that, hey, kind of the type A personality. I'm in New York City, and I start this business. I end up with a lot of restaurants up there, and become successful and up there, and just really kind of over focus. And once again I start forgetting things that are important, family and friends, and I'm obsessed in working,
Hmm.
and one of the things as we kind of graph into this conversation, as we start going, oh well, hey, I can fax a document from here to there, or we can get on a conference call. We don't have to fly and be in the together. And I'm like, well, that's great. Time is money and all these things. But, I had a fair amount of success in business and made money and lost money, as I'm sure a lot of people did. In '07, '08, when the economy tilted, I had, and my addiction took me to some places where, and I think one of the key points today we're going to be talking about is isolation, because you had focused on the framework of when does technology go from being healthy to into kind of a, for lack of a better expression, a kind of a darker space, or a little bit of a darker conversation. And that's the one that almost nobody wants to have.
Yeah.
What do I do when no one's looking? And what are the secretive type patterns or behaviors that I'm involved in, and if I'm isolated, how do people figure out what it is that's going on with me to be able to help me move away from those patterns? So,
Yeah,
um,
it's something that I'm sure we're going to really outline and discuss, because it's this idea that uh, just because you're surrounded and use technology all day doesn't mean that you have a problem or an addiction. I guess it's some of those behaviors that you were outlining and some of the consequences from those behaviors that really define what an addiction can become. So. Let's go ahead and let's see. So, where to tackle a topic this big?
right,
Why don't we talk about some definitions and definition in general? Like I said, I think a lot of people know your basics: your addiction to cigarettes, your addiction to alcohol, your addiction to anything like that. But why don't you go ahead and kind of expand our definition of addiction, and let's again then relate it to how you might see that related to technology.
sure. Well, I guess there's kind of a couple of components. One would be a physical thing. There's something actually is happening in the body with somebody that moves into an addictive space. Why you think it would be technology, um, repetitive looking at the phone or whatever it is that's going. That's a physical thing,
Hmm.
almost like when you look at a cigarette. Well, how many hits off my cigarette is each cigarette? How many cigarettes in a pack? How many? So it's something I'm doing repetitively, and then I begin to notice, even though I know it's hurting me, it may be taking away from my family or work or my relationships. I cross into a space where I kind of a little bit lose control, you know. And the thing is, once that's happened, if you begin to address that with me, I'm going to fight you about that. I'm going to push you back. I may try to laugh it off or change the topic, or point out your behavior to me to see if I can get you to back off. And then eventually I'm going to refuse to. I may shut down and isolate myself, in which case it's going to be nearly impossible to get to me at that point. So
Mm.
there's that piece, and then also in the mind, I like to use the term, or that's been phrased, obsession. A lot of people are familiar with, oh well, how many pair of shoes do you really need? You
Yeah.
know, I'm sitting there trying on a new pair of shoes, and I go, I know I've got a closet full of shoes I don't wear half the time, but these are cool. Let me do this, and here I am with another pair of shoes that I'm not going to wear, and um, so with the tech addiction, I'm looking at my phone, and I'm like, I was on a flight back then from Phoenix just the other day,
Hmm.
and there was a gentleman sitting next to me. I needed to use the restroom. I was in the middle seat, and I'm waving literally my face in front of his face like a wand for what seemed like at least a minute. And then finally I had to physically touch him to get him to come up from his phone and see that I needed to move.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think in my mind as I'm walking to the restroom, geez, I mean, I can't believe that guy was so zoned out that he couldn't see me. But I'll have people talking to me when I'm either maybe I'm watching Netflix, or maybe I'm involved in something else that I'm doing, and they're trying to talk to me and I can't hear them. So I have a mind that is repetitively kind of intruded on, or gets preoccupied with certain things, and so it
I,
kind of, yeah,
I,
you know what I'm, yeah,
Yeah, I always saw that as like a personality kind of thing because
yeah,
I noticed that when I grew up with my brother, he would be like that. You know, when he'd be playing computer games or reading a book or watching TV or something like that.
right,
Yeah, you would have to throw a pillow at him just to get him to pay attention to you.
yeah,
And you know, me, I could be fully engrossed in something, but I can still keep an ear out for conversation happening, you know, kind of in the other room. Like, are you saying that that level of, I guess, kind of being engrossed in an activity is a sign of something a little bit deeper, or do you think that's just a
yeah. I
kind of
think
a
it
personality?
can be. It's like, when I was working, I'm involved in my business, and I wouldn't take calls in the middle of the time of the day from anything that had anything other than to do with what I was doing in the moment. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If I'm an athlete, I was an
Right,
athlete. So if I'm on the track and I'm running the quarter mile, I can't be paying attention to what this guy is yelling in the seventh row of
right.
the stadium. I've got to stay in my body and do the task that I'm here to do, and so that's all wonderful. But there become these splits where, very much like an actor, he becomes the role that he's assumed there. And we all know, we've heard stories about the person, once that show is over, the role's done, that role continues to walk with that person, and
Yeah,
they split off into all kinds of other
I
conversations. So
I see. Makes perfect sense. So you're seeing some of these you're seeing some of these behaviors that you think technology, just like anything else, can really exacerbate. And I guess one of the things here, you know, one of the questions that we have here for you is that how is tech addiction different from any other more traditional form of addiction? Because technology, this is something that we have discussed on the show, and that's a lot of services, products,
yeah,
providers. They are more and more using psychology to get you addicted. They're using psychology to increase their metrics, to get you on the platform longer, for to get you more engaged. Like they're using psychologists to improve the business side of it. And I'm kind of wondering, how's it different, and are companies kind of hoping that it's kind of the same as traditional addictions?
yeah, it's interesting. There was a great article, and I don't know if you had that article that Dr. Nir Eyal had written in the New York Times, and was quoted, regarding, and this is one of the pioneers in the tech industry, and he released this book, uh, called Hooked, how to build, uh, habit forming products. And he talked, just as you were just saying, it's like, hey, if I'm on Facebook, the job of Facebook to keep you engaged, and they may look at what I've clicked on and put an ad in front of me that is attached to some of the things I'm doing, so I can continue to spin around in the web there that they're creating around me. And so from their perspective, more eyeballs and more eyeballs, that's what they're there to do. So my job in the restaurant business was, hey, the more you eat, the more you stay, the more you bring your friends, and you know and so, if I owned a clothing store, if the object was, you meant to come in and buy one suit and you walk out with three, well, how is that my fault? And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of was a little bit of his argument. And so he might say, well, let's look at developing some habits that may, um, to be able to control your attention, and say, well, it would be on you to maybe look at some patterns or practices, Kevin, that where you don't cross into the addicted behavior. Well, this, it kind of all becomes the same. If you're addicted to technology, what do I do when I'm isolated with that technology? I'm going to do things with my phone and my computer that maybe I might do, not do when everybody's around. So then now you've got around, obviously pornography, some of these other behaviors. Maybe you're married, and the next thing you know, you're having this little emotional affair with somebody on your computer. And
Mm-hmm.
we all hear stories like this all the time, but nobody talks about this stuff. And in that little space, when we start having these secrets, it just becomes very dangerous. And it's so subtle the way it takes place. I actually had to look. It's funny. I looked up the definition of that term, and and the definition of subtle is I will not be able to detect that this is what's going on.
Yeah.
So I ride, you know what I mean? I just ride over this line that I don't even realize I've crossed. And I'm generally the last one to know that now I've got a problem.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of these services, such as messaging apps and things like that. I mean, they make it very, very easy for like that not to kind of go into other ecosystems. Like they want
Right.
you in the ecosystem of whatever messaging app, whatever whatever browser you may be in. They're very segmented, and they're made like that. So you're saying that this and actually one thing I wanted to touch on here was you said that it's up to the individual to kind of say, using your suit example, if you go in for one suit and you walk out with three, that should have been your fortitude to only stick to what you went in there intending to do. Sales tactics aside, you were only supposed to buy one suit. If you bought three, then hey, that was on you. I think where that gets a little tricky is that the audience for the internet and technology, I should say, kind of in general, I think there's like 3 billion people currently connected to the internet in some form, most of them through smartphones and, a lot of different ways. Basic, Psych 101 classes are not a thing. Basic education is lacking in many, many areas of the world, and technology is spreading. I mean, for... I guess, Nir Eyal, and by the way, we found his book, and we'll throw a link of that in the show notes. But, to say that these people should have the competence in themselves to control this behavior, it seems like that works for smaller audiences, but technology's huge. Like, technology's net is massive. Is that something that we can rely on?
Well, that was his argument is, hey, it's on you if this is what's going on. But, and one of the things is like he wouldn't take responsibility for the creation of the addiction that came from something that was designed to addict you. So It's like, in other words, if we look at in the Western world or in the United States about treatment from drug, alcohol dependency, other forms of addiction, well, the pharmaceutical industry has gotten you addicted to whatever it is the doctor was paid to write a prescription by the, this and that. And now you're in a treatment facility and they're going to, anoint you with 2 or 3 new conditions which require medication. And it's just this game that never stops. And a lot of times people will get more ill in that system. So this is very much the same. So in regard to technology addiction, the conversation that you're saying, hey, if you can control yourself, that's great, but we're really not talking to that audience. We're talking about once you've crossed the line, now what do we do?
Right.
Are we going to legislate this? Are there policies in place? And can we expect groups like Facebook to self-police themselves?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, what was that film? Thank You for Smoking. And they were talking about the tobacco industry.
Yeah.
And at the very end of the film, the guy looked into the camera and said, the next thing they're going to tell you is cell phones don't cause brain cancer, and so we have all these things here, and we know, certain amount of electromagnetic frequencies coming out of phone are not safe, and they're not a good idea for the human body, let alone the younger developing brain and system of a younger person.
Mm-hmm.
But, I know that physically I've got to have the devices away from me for a good period of time at the end of the day so that my mind can slow down and get back with everything that's going on, just so I can sleep.
I've seen that, and whenever you look up how to get better, more rest of sleep, any online guide or blog or expert or psychologist, therapist, whatever, all of them, they always start with unplug yourself from your digital devices, turn off the TV for half an hour before bed, like at least. That's a guarantee, because and I'm sure you've heard the phrase fear of missing out, FOMO, and that's such that it's this idea that you are missing some important news story, you're missing something your friends are doing, you're missing the next big thing, and it used to happen on like maybe a daily when people used to get the newspaper every morning, or maybe like a weekly when they had like a weekly TV show, radio show, news show. companies have turned that into like an hourly or minute by minute thing that you're missing out on something, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, I mean, and that's the game. And so how do we get around the game is, it's just, were they talking about, I think Eyal was talking about, geez, I mean, you're playing Candy Crush 3 hours a day. How is that my fault?
Yeah. So let's, and you're talking about this whole idea of, what do we do to react to it? One question that we should ask before we, kind of get into how do you handle an addiction like this is how serious of a problem? Because some of the things that you mentioned, in dealing with technology, I think people do on a regular basis. Like you're one of having a TV on in just as background noise, not even consciously engaged in it, but just having it on. I know many people that sleep with the TV on just because that's the way that they prefer it. Some of these behaviors that you were talking about, people do them, but how serious of a problem is tech addiction?
Yeah, listen. I think when you are driving down the road and literally 70% of the people that you're in a driving with, you look to your left, you look to your right, literally 2 out of 3 people that you look at are involved in something other than what they're doing, which is driving.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm walking down the street, literally, I was on my scooter this morning down here in South Beach. And I was coming up, my light was green, and there was a woman walking across, and her light was red. She was walking across in the middle of traffic with her phone a foot away from her face. And I had to honk at her, and she looked at me like I was crazy. I said, "You almost got yourself killed."
Yeah.
And she looked at me like, "What is the matter with you?" And that is just, it blows my mind. But I understand what I'm looking at because I have, many other behaviors in my history that indicate I cannot see what I'm doing is just absolutely insane, and so I think if we're speaking to the larger audience where they'll go, oh, well, tech addiction, of course. Well, they never think that you're speaking to them. Well,
Yeah.
here you and I are on here going, I'm going to try to get through to a large group of people going, listen, why is it that if you're going to go for a walk around your block with your family, why do you feel so compelled that you need to have your phone in your pocket? For what? Can I be quiet and be still and be with my family for 30 minutes? See, those are all red flags. And when it gets quiet, I just always, when I'm talking to people, I'm like, you know what the loudest sound in the world is these days?
What's that?
Nothing. That's the loudest noise there is quiet.
And of course, here on the air, it's doubly so. So I'm not going to try to, give people a taste of the loudest noise in the world. But and by the way, just because you brought it up kind of tangentially, I had to look up how many people, text while drive, and I think that's a good kind of example of a tech addiction because there's a very clear consequence where either you die or you hit someone and they die. Like it's a very dangerous activity that can be, it has very quick consequences. And by the way, right here, 94% of drivers support a ban on texting while driving, but in a poll by AAA, 35% of people still do it anyway. Like, I think everyone unanimously says don't text and drive, but 1 in 3 people still do.
Absolutely. So
it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be, with somebody. And I said, please, you're driving. I'm over here. You have more than one person. You're not the only person in the car, and we're all at risk here. And they're like, yeah, I get it. And then yet I have to admit there are occasions where you'll find me doing that very thing I just complained about.
Yeah.
So it's just to your point there. And so how do we fix this? How do we legislate this? I mean, if the laws for texting and driving were equal, what they might be for drinking and driving, maybe we would see some activity.
And definitely, I mean, the laws for drinking and driving, a night in prison, court date, huge fines, texting while driving, maybe a ticket, maybe, distracted driving, and, you're on your way. But of course, the charges for manslaughter for doing either, obviously still the same. I got to say though, getting back to, kind of the tech companies and where they kind of share this, and Nir Eyal in his book is one person and his accounting of how companies like Facebook and others, kind of use that psychology to their benefit. But even though he may be the first and he may be one of the pioneers, a lot of other companies are taking note and following his example. Should tech companies in general, because I can understand where one does it and they become successful and we can kind of warn against it, but when the entire industry of Netflix has, the way that Netflix, trust me, everyone loves Netflix, but the metrics that they keep on people and how they keep you glued to the platform of Netflix, that's why there may be a dozen different user interfaces, because they're testing to see which one gets you paying attention longer, and video ads and things like that. I mean, everything from Amazon to get you to shop more, everything to really, and Apple to kind of use their products more. Everyone does this. The tech company in these apps, and we haven't even talked about apps, which are a whole new level of addiction. Should they? And you said that in his opinion, that's not his fault. It should be on the individual. As someone who
that was his argument.
Yes.
Mine,
and now and now I'm kind of interested in yours as someone who's worked in this area for a while. Do you believe that this should be like? The response to this should be education and educating people that you have the tools to break out of the cycle? Or should it be that, the individual just is not capable of standing up against multi-billion-dollar dozens of teams of psychologists? We need to level the playing field a little bit. Where do you come in on this?
Well, it's interesting. And, Eyal made an argument and say, hey, if you're expecting these groups that design the technology to get you hooked to do anything to make their products less engaging, I mean, that's not even logically reasonable to assume that they're going to do that. And I think that a lot of times when people are looking at these devices, they're anxious, or they're just bad at being alone, and so I'm going to grab onto, just as a human being, anything I hold on to avoid looking at myself and dealing with the world on my own. So any help I can get, I'm going to grab it, and these companies know that. And as you said, they're studying our behavior. I think there's even a company that studies the iridology of what you look at, and they can post ads on a wall as you're walking down the hallway.
Yeah,
which is amazing. And so it's just moving faster and more rapidly. And, not shockingly, we're becoming more and more disconnected from each other. And that's the thing about the whole mess is, I think where it's going is that we're not even going to realize how detached we are. They're going to design imaginary friends for us to talk to. So, our son is back in the room. He's got his headset on and he's gaming. And my wife came out and said, well, he's with his friends. And I said, no, he's not with his friends. He's on his headset and he's imagining that he's with his friends. If he was with his friends, he'd be outside playing in the yard or doing whatever they're doing. So even we catch ourselves being, oh, he's good. He's in good shape. He's hanging out with his buddies, but he's not. And this is the thing that I think we need to address even deeper. And I think I can't imagine anybody that is going to listen to you and I speaking would not be able to comprehend what we're saying, but will they like it? Will they be open to looking at some different ways of behaving so that we can get the result that we all know we really needed, which is more human contact, not less. And that's the other thing about the internet and this connection is all these social groups bring us together, but then all of that behavior is dissecting us even more. So it's a heavy conversation, man.
So to latch onto that conversation a little bit,
yeah.
I did pull back a little bit when you said, he's in his room and he's gaming, he's not with his friends. I took a little exception to that because I I play a lot of video games. There's no doubt about that. But I see it as time that I augment my in-person relationships with. Like, I've seen it time and time again. You get these arguments where it's like I have lots of online friends, but then they really sit back and they self-analyze and they reflect and they say, I don't really have friends. Like they're not really there for me. They, in person, they may text something that I want to read, but they're not going to help me as a human. And like I see that all the time. But don't you think that by mixing some of those aspects, like what your son is doing, as long as he has a social circle in person at school and he meets these people, that as long as it's not strictly technology, some time is still beneficial, right?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, I look at that sort of thing. I was talking to a group this morning in a Midwestern state, and we were talking about education, for example. And Bobby Kennedy's up in New York City at Pace University teaching public and environmental law courses, and having access to that through technology is a fantastic thing. That's all great. And being connected to groups that are, chat rooms that are talking about things that go somewhere and have some depth and weight to them. I love all that stuff. And, it's just, as I'm looking at the mind of a younger person, I look at, just in the last 10 years from '07 to current, what is the suicide rate of people?
That story did just come out. Yeah. That was
what, 56% increase? I mean,
yeah.
It didn't say it had anything to do with technology, but I wonder, what is that connection? What is the connection to depression? Yeah, man. I mean, when I'm sitting there looking at my phone, my head is down. I'm leaning forward, and someone pointed out to me that is the posture of a depressed human being. Your eyes are down and you're leaning forward. You're not looking up and out at the world. Your physical posture has.
It's someone drawing in on themselves and not open to their environment. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, and I will definitely say that we just wrote an article a couple of weeks ago where we looked at the benefits and the drawbacks of social media. And one of the drawbacks of social media that I found when I was writing the article was indeed a level of depression. Is this idea that you are looking at everyone's information that they're putting out about themselves. And trust me, people are not putting out, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, I feel horrible, and I'm not going to have a good day today. Like, they're only going to put, here's something good, successful, here's something that I want you to see because I'm proud of it. And it leads to this, and I'm sure you've seen it in a lot of people, it leads to this that you're comparing your life to their highlight reel. Like I really do feel like that's part of what this generation that has grown up on social media is that they think everything is going to be like social media, and social media is inherently about lying to as many people as you can.
Well, it's so interesting. I grew up, my dad was a politician, and our folks were always going to listen, be cognizant of the family that you grew up, you have a responsibility, and people are watching everything that you do and that sort of thing. And so there was a tension sometimes where we're like, okay, well, the way I'm really feeling, I can't walk out in the world with that. I'm going to have to make up some other story to hide what's really going on. And so we see that intensified these days where, I'm not going to say, hey, I lost an investor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an image of me on the paddleboard on the bay here.
Yeah.
So
it's really scary, and of course, again, leads to this idea that like you mentioned, suicide rate. I mean, I'm pretty darn sure no one at Facebook said, let's create a platform that's really going to depress everyone who uses it, or we have the worst. We have the worst interest in mind for all of our users. No, these are unintended side effects that we're only, now kind of, we're trying to reactively react to them. And I guess technology, now that we're coming up with this research and we're seeing trends that are trends, like you said, over 10 years, 1 year, maybe an outlier, 2 years, maybe that's interesting. 3, 5, 10 years, that is a trend. So I think that people are certainly, self responsibility, self reliance, that will never be left out of the equation. But I guess when it comes to these companies, we have taken to task a number of industries that have been very predatory to consumers.
Yeah.
It just seems like people like tech. People like Apple if they're Apple fanboys, and they feel like Apple the corporation is their friend. If they are into Microsoft, if it's their favorite gaming gear, if it's their favorite PC manufacturer, if it's Amazon, they love Amazon. Netflix versus Hulu, like people like these companies. So I feel like we're going to have a very hard conversation about, kind of getting them to, I don't want to say pull back, but change their methodology.
No question. I mean, even we're talking about in the world of addiction and treatment and all that sort of thing. And, in certain communities, there are meetings that people can go to together. But, I was talking to a friend of mine in Saudi Arabia, and he said I can't really get to one of those meetings where I am. So the way I go is I go into these online communities that can serve me in that way because I'm remote,
Mm-hmm.
and I need that connection. And, how much of that do I do before I become isolated? And the other thing I was just kind of, I don't know why this came into me as you were talking. It's like, the way I use things, if you talk to a Native American Indian, he will talk to you about the use of tobacco as medicine.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't use it like that. I mean, that's not how I was using it. I was inhale, problem, exhale, solution, which was, the opposite of everything that he was saying. Certain people can, come home and have a drink to relax a little bit and, and be able to socialize and, a certain percentage of the population, and they say generally about 10 to 12% of the population, we are just wired differently for whatever reason. So if somebody has an allergy to dairy, for example, nobody's yelling and screaming at them. It's like, hey, if somebody has cancer, the doctor's not yelling at that person. They're working with. So when we're dealing with people that are addicted, there's a way that we can communicate with these people. And unfortunately, in the Western world, we tend to shun these people or turn our backs on them or displace them so we don't have to deal with it.
I have noticed.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in here and say that I have noticed that there has been a shift over the past 15 years or so about mental health, and I think addiction, plays a large role in that, where we no longer see mental health as a personal failing. We no longer see it as someone who has a weak constitution, who just who just can't deal with it, and they just need to suck it up. Mental health has become a topic of conversation, and you're right. I'm hoping that addiction can go through that same evolution that mental health did.
Absolutely, Ben.
So with that being said, we have so a couple more questions here for you. What should be done, if anything, to alleviate this? Because we talked about some of the different routes that can go on. I think personally, first and foremost, just like mental health and just like a lot of these topics, awareness, and that's why I love running a show like this. Awareness is key, because if you know about these things, like even if you don't do anything actively, just knowing about it will change your behavior on some level. So personally, I think awareness. What do you think? Is it awareness as well? Is it legislation like you were talking about? What are some way, or is it about personal development and kind of changing the self? What do you think is the solution?
That's really great. I think you hit on all three, and they're very important. It's like, when I'm addicted, this is not like a moral failing. It's like, you said these tech companies didn't design themselves to injure people. That wasn't what they were trying to do, And so once somebody becomes addicted, I mean, it's not really a choice. They didn't really see that this is how it was going to end up. It wasn't the plan to end up so, I would say so broken in a certain way that they needed to be addressed or interrupted or that sort of thing. But I think in terms of recovery, you see treatment facilities for all kinds of other things, but you're not really hearing much right now about somebody being treated for an addiction to technology. I mean, maybe I know when a lot of these folks are, being checked into treatment centers for other things, the center, the first thing they'll do is we're taking your phone, and your interaction with the outside world is going to be nothing for a while, because we have to get down to causes and conditions here. But I think that's the first thing in terms of awareness, is realizing the person that has jumped over into this other place, that's not what they intended. They intended to be like the rest of you all, but they kind of lost their way. And, maybe there is some legislation. Maybe people will begin to wake up enough to go, listen, I have a problem. Just like you said, mental illness. A lot of people in the entertainment music industry said, look, I suffer from this, or, alcohol and drug addiction. We just heard the story about the guy from Metallica that was put back into rehab after being sober for 15 years. And fortunately for him, the band stopped the tour and didn't go to Europe. They loved him enough and cared about him enough to say, your health is more important to us than going on tour. Yeah. Whereas the reverse of the conversation, you end up having conversations like Amy Winehouse and some people that slide off the end of the rail. And the reason I think tech addiction is even a deeper conversation is because it's just more subtle than the rest of them, I think, combined.
And subtle in a way that affects a lot of people, because if you can catch your 12-year-old drinking a bottle of whiskey, you'd be like, well, there's something brewing there. If you see someone abusing, medication, if you see someone who is smoking cigarettes, like a lot of addictions are very obvious. But like you said, your kid, like millions of others in America, play video games and probably play them multiple hours a day. Although I know many parents who kind of limit that time, but still left to their own devices, video games, a form of technology, will be the obvious winner, I think, to a lot of people. And not even for kids for video games, but adults and the elderly who unfortunately can't get out of the house, they find themselves addicted to social media. They find themselves browsing the internet, reading stories and things like that. It's widespread because, well, and actually I said that wrong. It's subtle because it's so accepted and widespread. I'm not saying that Facebook or social media is bad. I'm not saying video games are bad. It's just that it's an approved form of recreation, and I guess that's when it becomes hard to diagnose when it's too much,
Absolutely. I was just, as you were speaking, I'm thinking about, a lot of patients with food addiction, and hey,
you can't take food away from them.
Yeah, you got to eat. I mean, you have to eat. So, boy, and so with technology, I mean, if I'm not using technology, I'm not connected to anything, because everyone is like, hey, you don't have a smartphone? I actually was one of the last people to have a smartphone, because I just knew myself. I'm like, I'm not getting sucked into that, man.
I was the exact same. I know, now host of Computer America, but I had a feature phone for until like 2000 and maybe 13 or something like that. Now it's so productive. I'm not gonna say I'm addicted to it. It's so productive. I can't see myself living without it, but I still do take steps because I know that I can shun my family, my friends, and I hate it when I see a group of friends at a table at a restaurant and they all have their phones out. And it's like, why bother meeting up? Like, you guys could be doing your own things and not wasting each other's time. It's crazy. So with all that being said, the final question I have for you, will this get worse before it gets better? Because maybe when I was a kid in the 90s, that's when, I don't want to say, technology, the term technology applies to anything in the past couple thousands of years. But I guess tech, when it comes to consumer tech and computers and the internet and that kind of thing, I grew up with it, but I was still very moderated with it. This generation and the generation after are engrossed in it. To be competitive in a workforce, to be competitive in education, you have to be engrossed in it. Is this going to get better before it gets worse?
I don't think so. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I don't like talking that way. I just see that's a wave that hasn't crested, and I don't know. I don't even have a projection for you on what that looks like, Ben. But I think, as you said, what would we say? out of 7 billion people, about 3 billion have access to behave in any of these ways. And I think there will be access to more and more. And I think it's just going to be a little bit of a deeper dysrhythm before we begin to looking at ways to heal it.
That's something that I always try to make clear, whenever I get the opportunity, is that the internet is going to change. Like the economy of the internet and just the culture of the internet will change when, currently the Western countries, Eurozone, America, many South Americans, India, China, those places have their people connected to the internet. What happens when the majority of Africa, with their 3 billion people, come on the internet? They're not going to get a different internet. They're going to be on the same internet we are. It's going to be a great thing. It's going to be a great thing when you have 3 to 4 billion more minds creating art, creating music, sharing content that they like. It's going to be a great thing. But it's also a scary thing when you got to think that's 3 billion more people who are going to be susceptible to scams and companies and so on and so forth. It's a good and a bad thing, and I'm hoping it's more of a good thing. But I completely understand where you can say it can get worse before it gets better, because hey, we're in uncharted territory. We just don't know. I want to leave this conversation with kind of some of your personal touches. Obviously, the work that you do, and I probably should have gotten into this way earlier. You work with companies or individuals, and you're going to be starting up a course. You're writing a book. How are you reaching out, and what ways are you hoping to solve this problem, if not just bring awareness to it?
Well, Ben, all the above. I mean, all this started from a conversation that a music friend of mine had with me one night. I was getting ready to do a talk, and he said, "You need to record this." And I said, "Absolutely not." And he pressed play on his phone. He slid it in front of me. He said, "Don't touch that." And I began to have a talk with a large group of people. Mm-hmm. And from that, here we are on this call. And apparently the tone of the way that I was speaking to the people, it ended up grabbing a large audience. So, my history is, anchor relationships with some pretty large companies in the world. And that was my track record. So, anywhere somebody's got a little dysrhythm or needs to have something changed in their company, in the school, in the community. And I really love working one-on-one quietly with people to when the door is closed and the shades are drawn, you tend to be able to bring a person down a little bit quicker than you'd be able to do in a group setting. So I always enjoy that too. And it's pretty sacred stuff for me. And a lot of that stuff I do for free. So
I hope that you can do it for 4 billion people, because that's what you need. But I will say, Kevin, this has been a very, very fun conversation. And you're right. This was going to be very deep. It's going to be very heavy. But it's something that even if people aren't actively talking about it, they're living it. They are living it to some extent, because, listening here on Computer America, of course, just in some ways, unless you're living off the grid, which I think personally, a complete aversion to technology is proof positive of technology addiction. Technology addiction, because you can't take it in moderation. Like it's just not in your life. So anyways, this has been a very fun conversation. If people want to find out more, you'll get back to me, of course, twitter.com, Kevin D. Sullivan, if you want to follow, follow Kevin, obviously very, very learned and a lot of fun to hear about. And Kevin, anything else we didn't cover? Anything else you want to mention before we say goodbye?
I think we covered it all. It's like, there's one big tribe of us, and we just got to continue to look for ways to stay connected in a way that really is a good positive vibration. And that's really the main thing. And there are a lot of great ways to do that with technology. And as you said, there are some not so healthy ways.
All right. So everyone, once again, links in the show notes, computeramerica.com. And Kevin, I want to thank you for taking time, joining me on here. And this is great. I look forward to hearing about what you do. Keep in touch. And hey, love to have you back on the show.
Ben, thanks so much. I appreciate your time as well.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. So until next time, Kevin, have a great one. Have a great day. And hey, we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Peace to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. So there he goes. And that was our conversation with Kevin Sullivan, sobriety coach and mentor. I know we have, in my recollection, we have never had one of those here on Computer America. And I'm not saying we need to do it every week, but it's open up to me. that it's a very interesting conversation to have here on the air, and we love to have that. So we hope that you found that fun. Again, twitter.com, Kevin D. Sullivan, if you would like to check that out. And yeah, everyone, hey, thank you so much. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and do computer and technology news and to carry out today's show. And hey, that's brought to you by Computer America. So because that was so, I don't know, I guess kind of heavy, let's have something a little bit more fun. And by fun, I mean old technology, because hey, who said old can't be fun? Craig, I hope you're listening. Let's go ahead and call this one Ars Technica. And the Air Force finally retires 8-inch floppies from its missile launch control system. That's right, the intercontinental ballistic missiles were still being run on 8-inch floppies. Ladies and gentlemen, when I first got into school and I was working when I was doing schoolwork, like the first PowerPoint I made was in like 1999 or 2000. It was fourth grade, whatever year that was, probably about 2000. I felt like that was so long ago, and even back then they had 3.5-inch floppies. Man, were those things fun, with a little metal slider that you could spring back into place. Completely ruined the disc, but hey, it was fun. I never even touched an 8-inch floppy. If you want to know the current state of the technology used with the intercontinental ballistic missile and nukes and things like that, turns out 50 years ago, 8-inch floppies were state of the art, and now they no longer are. So they said that from 5 years ago, a CBS 60-minute report publicized a bit of technology trivia many in the defense community were aware of. The fact that 8-inch floppy disks were still used to store data critical to operating the Air Force's Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Command, Control, and Communications Network. The system, once called the Strategic Air Command Digital Network, relied on IBM Series 1 computers installed by the Air Force at Minuteman II missile sites in the 1960s and 70s. 60s and 70s. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to hit 2020. We are in 2019, the end of it. 50 years of service. The 8-inch floppy is finally going away. Those floppy disks have now been retired, despite the contention by the Air Force at the time of the 60 Minutes report that the archaic hardware offered a cybersecurity advantage, which is bull. Like, obviously, you can't hack into an 8-inch floppy. You have to get a physical 8-inch floppy, and then you have to search the world over for an 8-inch floppy reader, right? It's great. But clearly, if you want something to be secure, you need it to be the latest. You can air gap it, you can do all these kinds of things, but knowing who's been accessing the data, that only comes with modern networking systems. So they said that SAACS is an upgrade that swaps, and by the way, that's I'm sorry, they actually have a typo here in the article from Ars Technica. It's actually the Strategic Automated Command and Control System. Said that is an upgrade that swaps the floppy disk for what Lieutenant Colonel Jason Rossi, commander of the Air Force, described as a highly secured solid-state digital storage solution, so SSDs. The floppy drives have fully retired in June, so we're a couple months out, but hey, still lovely to hear. I don't know about you. That seems like such an interesting part of not just military memorabilia, which I know is hugely collectible, but from a technology standpoint, wouldn't you love to get your hands on some of those 8-inch floppies? Like, I know that there is, especially if they were being used up until 6 months ago, there's still data on there that could be highly sensitive to, military installations and things like that. So they obviously won't give them out. But wouldn't you love a copy of or one of these 8-inch floppies to kind of keep and put on display? I think that'd be super cool. So while the SACCS is reliable, it is obviously expensive and difficult to maintain when it fails. There are no replacement parts available, so all components must be repaired, a task that may require hours manipulating parts under a microscope. Civilian Air Force employees with years of experience in electronics repairs handle the majority of the work, but the code that runs the system is still written by enlisted Air Force programmers. You think about that because, when you're looking for a job in programming, you want to have your skills up to snuff with the latest, the greatest, the newest, what's going to be innovative in the months and years to come. But I guess the Air Force needs to train programmers to be up to date on what was the newest back in the 1960s. So, yeah, like I said, 8-inch floppies no longer being used by the Department of Defense for intercontinental ballistic missiles. And of course, it was just probably for tracking data such as, wind conditions and readiness and that kind of thing. But still, having even that data on a more secured SSD should make everyone feel a little bit safer. So check that one out. Time for just one more story, and even this one is going to have to be decently short. How about we let's see, and let's go ahead and talk about. Wow. Okay, this is a good one because again, the conversation here has been so kind of heavy. A good conversation, want to be clear, but hey, this is also a good thing that Lyft is doing. So Lyft's obviously in the war with Uber and other ride-sharing platforms. You're wondering how can they get some good press? And you know what? I'll give it to them. This is a good one. Lyft will give people free and discounted rides to job interviews. That's right, saying it'll also help folks get to work and back until they pick up their first paycheck. So obviously your first paycheck sometimes doesn't come until 2 weeks after. And hey, this could be something that is just one good thing that Lyft is definitely doing. So Lyft has announced a plan to help people making their way through the employment pipeline to get to and from job interviews, professional training programs, and new places of work with free or discounted rides. Saying that it's working with several nonprofits, including Goodwill, USO, National Down Syndrome Society, on the Job Access Program. So they said that this is available to those in low-income areas and are ages 18 to 24. There's a number of people. So this includes veterans, people with disabilities, refugees, formerly incarcerated individuals, which is, I know that we don't talk about the criminal justice system here on the show a lot, but hey, people who have done their time, done their service, they need a leg up in society just like anyone else. Anyways, those in low income areas and 18 to 24-year-olds perhaps trying to land their first job. They said that the program will initially be available in 35 different cities. I'm sure that we'll have a link in the show notes that you can see if it includes yours. But hey, they said that other partners include United Way and 211, Europe Generation, Cut 50, the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, and Upwardly Global. So this is a pretty wide-reaching program that they're trying to implement here. Along with trips to and from interviews and job training programs, Lyft aims to help people get to work and home again for the first 3 weeks of employment. That could ease the burden for them getting to their jobs until they can pick up a paycheck and pay for transit themselves. I think this is just fantastic. Earlier this year, Lyft committed to spending at least $50 million, which is up to 1% of profits. So I guess they were making 1% times 100. That means they made about $5 billion in profits. Interesting. Annually on measures such as transportation, infrastructure, sustainability, and donated rides. The Job Access Program is part of that effort. So Lyft has a number of programs in place to help people in need. For those of you who don't know, during the Northern California blackouts last week, it offered free rides. Oh, let me just change something here real quick. Yeah, there we go. It offered free rides to relief centers, and in recent months, it expanded its availability of wheelchair-accessible rides and non-emergency rides for Medicaid patients. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be the end of it. I hope you had fun on today's show. I sure did, and I hope that, hey, you learned something, I learned something. If nothing else, 8-inch floppies. They were still being used until just a few months ago. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, Computer America, Ben Crossman. Hey, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, although we are coming up to our holiday schedule, we should be here for most of the days up until, I think we take off like 3 days for the Thanksgiving weekend, and then we take off like a week or two for Christmas and New Year. But hey, other than that, we'll be here Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Until then, have a great day. Thank you so much. Catch you next time. Bye, everyone.